My family ridiculed my metalwork. Years later, when my brother-in-law's hedge fund imploded, they tried to seize my property to bail him out. The blood drained from Julian's face, leaving him a ghastly white, as the words Forge Tech Solutions hung in the air. For years, he'd seen me as nothing more than a simpleton, a hobbyist playing with fire. Now, in this very workshop, surrounded by the metallic tang of my supposed insignificance, the full weight of his colossal miscalculation was about to crash down on him. My name is Jack, and for 25 years, my family had perfected the art of looking right through me. They saw a kid who preferred the honest grit of welding to the polished sheen of Wall Street, and they dismissed me as the untalented one, the guy who couldn't quite measure up. They said it with their words, with their disappointed glances, and with the subtle way they always talked around me, never to me, about my life. I still remember the day Sophie and I got married. It wasn't a country club affair, not by a long shot. We exchanged vows under the sprawling oak on my grandmother's property, the same land my family now sought to strip from me. Hay bales for seats, wildflowers everywhere, and the warm, smoky scent of barbecue filling the air. My guys, true to form, showed up in their auto, heart shirts and work boots, while Sophie's friends were a vision of sundresses and homemade sweets. It felt perfect, a genuine celebration of who we were. But my family, they arrived as if fulfilling a grim civic duty, their faces betraying their silent judgment. Dad, in his pristine Audi, checked his watch every 4 minutes, his gaze darting around as if searching for an escape route. Mom wore a perpetual frown, no doubt mentally tallying the perceived savings from skipping a fancy venue, her eyes holding that familiar mix of pity and disapproval. Olivia, my sister, and her husband Julian, arrived dressed like they were about to walk a red carpet at a Forbes gala, radiating an aura of superiority that could curdle milk. They were always overdressed, always performing for an invisible audience. The ceremony went smoothly enough. My best man Tom even managed to lighten the mood during the "speak now or forever hold your peace" part, feigning a cough and muttering, "Can we just skip to the food?" After the initial laughter died down, the speeches began. Tom, bless his heart, told a hilarious story about a steel shelf I'd welded in college that nearly took out our roommate. But then Julian, my brother-in-law, rose to speak. That smug, self-satisfied look was plastered across his face, the one that screamed, "I am the smartest man in this room." He reminded everyone, with a condescending chuckle, that his 5 years of age advantage and his business degree had made all the difference. He worked in finance, you see, making actual money, not hobby money, from some metal shop. He lifted his glass, supposedly to Sophie and me, but his words were a dagger. "To be honest," he began, his voice dripping with fox amusement. "I assumed Olivia was kidding when she told me about her brother's impending marriage. I thought his welding torch was the only real relationship he had." A few of his finance buddies guffawed. My friends, however, sat in stony silence, their hands clenching around their beers. But then I met Sophie. She's grounded. It sounds like she portrays someone who doesn't quite understand how society operates. It makes sense. He uses metal in his work. She works with match-made plants in a hardware store. Sophie's grip tightened on my hand, her knuckles turning white. I could see the steel in her eyes, even as her smile remained fixed. Julian wasn't finished. "I remember when Olivia and I first started dating. Jack would spend hours creating go-karts and other metal crafts," she'd tell me. "Meanwhile, I was tracking my portfolio, reading about market movements." He paused for dramatic effect. "Some of us are destined to build empires, aren't we? Society needs both, I suppose. Someone has to make the boardroom fixtures." He let out another insufferable laugh. My friend Chris, God bless him, muttered something under his breath that would have sparked a brawl if we hadn't been at a wedding. Then Olivia, my own sister, stood beside Julian, her voice sickly sweet. "I'm so proud of my little brother for finding someone who appreciates his unique lifestyle. You're really courageous, Sophie, for adopting this whole primitive lifestyle. Although I respect your dedication to simplicity, I could never give up my weekly shopping excursions and spa visits." It was a public performance, a thinly veiled judgment disguised as a compliment. And my father? He delivered a speech that might as well have been a grocery list, standing there in his $1,000 suit, gazing at our simple setup as if it caused him physical pain. He talked about my different route, about how he hoped for the best. The unspoken disappointment hung heavy in the air, a familiar shroud over every family gathering. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Sophie and I were the only ones left cleaning up. She found me by the oak tree, staring into the fading light. "They aren't worth it," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I know what we are constructing here. It's true, it matters. They're simply too preoccupied with keeping score to notice. She was right, of course. But all I could think about, on what should have been the greatest night of my life, was how my own family saw me, the inadequate guy, the unsuccessful one who settled for a basic marriage. I had no idea then just how foolish their words, their judgments, would turn out to be. They believed they knew me. They didn't. Years passed, a quiet rhythm of sparks and molten metal. I worked full time at the shop, creating specialized fabrications that kept us comfortable, free from financial worries. I'd secured contracts for architectural metalwork, custom railings, the kind of steady work that demanded skill and precision. But what they didn't know was what I was doing in the back corner of that shop. For 5 years, even before I met Sophie, I'd been engaged in a secret experiment, driven by the frustration of seeing exterior metal rust away after just a few years. I devoured books, contacted metallurgy professors online, ran tests in my spare time. Sophie, with her background in environmental chemistry, helped me grasp the technical aspects. She'd come home from the conservation center to find me covered in chemical compounds and metal shavings, wrestling with complex formulas. After 3 years of botched trials and countless ruined test pieces, I finally got it right. The formula worked. It made steel and aluminum stronger, lighter, and virtually impervious to corrosion, all while being environmentally safe. I subjected it to every brutal test imaginable: stress, salt spray, 2 harsh winters outside. The metal held up, far better than anything I'd ever seen. 2.5 years ago, I filed the patents, 4 of them, covering different facets of the process and key applications. This was before Sophie knew, before anyone knew. Then I started shopping the technology to manufacturers, formed an LLC, repositioned assets for legal protection. Forge Tech Solutions, I called it. I wasn't attempting to hide it, not really. I just didn't want my family's cynical eyes, their belittling comments, anywhere near something so genuinely mine. Here's the thing about ambition that's constantly invalidated: you learn to nurture it in silence. You realize that sometimes the only way to build something substantial is to keep it hidden from those who only know how to tear down. The first year, nothing happened. The second year, a regional manufacturer showed interest. By 2.5 years, roughly 6 months before the whole dam burst, I had licensed deals with 2 reliable businesses, and the company was valued at a cool $2 million. The funds from Forge Tech Solutions were in corporate accounts, managed by people who understood actual finance, not just speculation. Sophie and I, the metal fabricator, and the conservationist, continued to live in our modest home, driving our old trucks. On the surface, nothing changed. Meanwhile, my family was living a very different life, splashed all over social media. Julian had left his corporate job to launch his own investment company, making bold bets when everyone else was cautious, all in on real estate development, and getting in early on the next big thing. Dad spoke of him as if he had personally invented capitalism. Olivia naturally became a full-time influencer, constantly posting about luxury. Julian, the smart young investor who was upending everything, was her star. As soon as his firm took off, she quit her event planning job, dedicating herself to recording their ideal existence online. They bought an enormous house in a posh area, replete with a wine cellar, home gym, and a special closet just for her designer bags. Olivia chronicled every square inch of it. They invited us to their housewarming. I was on the verge of refusing, but Sophie persuaded me to go. So, I spent a week building them a coffee table, tempered glass on a custom steel frame, with artistic, matte black powder, coated joints. I was genuinely proud of that piece. Olivia's smile, though, turned to plastic the moment she saw it. "Oh, thank you so much," she chirped, instantly relegating it to a corner, forgotten. The entire evening was a masterclass in flaunting. Olivia dragged Sophie around, introducing her to her influencer friends with that same condescending tone, like a charity case. "This is Sophie, my sister-in-law." These women would size Sophie up, from her modest outfit to her practical shoes, before turning back to Olivia to discuss the latest channel collection. Julian spent most of the night cornering me with his finance buddies, at one point patting my shoulder. "Good for you, man. Honest work. She works in conservation, very noble, lives on almost nothing to save the trees." The patronizing warmth in his voice made my skin crawl. Later in the living room, Julian was holding court, regaling everyone with tales of a huge deal he'd closed, about vision and knowing which investments were dying and which were the future. Olivia hung on his arm, practically glowing. "The world needs guys like you," he proclaimed. "Someone has to make the stuff we put in our offices." Speaking of old school, how's the metal shop, Jack? Still making mailboxes for the neighbors? Olivia giggled, a hollow, manufactured sound. "My husband is just so brilliant with money. I honestly don't know how he does it. I just trust him completely and let him handle everything. She looked at Sophie, and Julian looked at me, a silent challenge in his eyes. The room fell silent. For 5 agonizing seconds, I had nothing. Just that old, familiar feeling of being the family joke, the perennial underachiever. It was a visceral punch to the gut, a cold knot forming in my stomach. Then, Elisa's voice, clear and sharp, cut through the stillness. Better than gambling away other people's retirement funds. Elisa, my cousin Rachel's wife, had been quietly observing. Rachel, the only sane member of the family, a teacher who deliberately stayed out of the drama, called me on the way home. Mom had shot Sophie a look that could have killed, and Olivia gasped, her hand flying to her chest as if physically struck. Rachel's warning was vague, but it stuck with me. That was intense, but between us, be careful. I've been hearing rumors. Julian's making some risky moves. Some of his deals aren't looking so good. As I drove away from that sterile mansion, a chilling premonition settled over me. Julian wasn't building an empire. He was building a bomb, and it was about to explode. This entire dynamic, where one family member is constantly elevated while another is systematically devalued, creates a fertile ground for resentment and ultimately disaster. This psychological pattern, often rooted in familial invalidation, can lead to profound self-doubt in the target and a dangerously inflated ego in the favored child. Another year went by. Things at the shop, and more importantly at Forge Tech Solutions, were picking up speed. Mom would text, asking why we never visited, conveniently forgetting the last disaster. We stopped getting party invites, which was a relief. Holiday calls were shorter, more forced. My family still thought I was making decorative gates, oblivious to the fact that Sophie had quit her conservation job to help me full time with the technical side of our Titan coating. She understood the chemistry better than I did, refining formulas, ensuring environmental safety. Forge Tech Solutions had grown from a side project to something demanding serious attention. I'd brought on a part-time business manager, Lucas, who was a wizard with licensing agreements and patent law. We were deep in negotiations with another industrial manufacturer about using my coating process for their production lines. But then, one afternoon in October, my phone rang. Rachel. Her voice was trembling. "Jack, are you alone? I was in the shop." "Yeah, what's wrong?" "It's Julian. He's in serious trouble, possibly criminal trouble." I turned off my grinder. The sudden silence in the shop felt heavy, suffocating. "What happened?" "I was at your parents' last night. They thought I was busy, but I could hear them talking to Olivia on the phone." "Jack, Julian lost everything. Not just his money, but his clients' money, too. He persuaded so many people to invest with him. Your dad's friends, old college friends, even some of Olivia's relatives. I heard talk of lawsuits, fraud charges. I don't know all the specifics, but he's completely underwater." I thought about all those speeches at parties, all that talk about vision, and knowing winners from losers. He had taken all their money and made some huge bet that went sideways. The development deal was fake, or the land was contaminated. Rachel's voice trailed off, a sound of utter despair. "Why are you calling me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Because they're coming for you," she said, and my blood ran cold. "I heard your dad say it clearly. You're the only one with real assets." He was talking about the shop, about Grandma's land. "You owe it to the family." The nerve of it hit me like a physical punch. For years, they had treated my life like a consolation prize, my work like a quaint hobby. Now, with their golden son-in-law crashed and burned, suddenly what I had built was valuable. The family's safety net. He can't be serious. He's completely serious? Mom's a wreck. She keeps saying Julian made one mistake, and the family has to stick together. Olivia's apparently having a complete breakdown, and they see you as the only way out. That evening, Sophie and I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples. "They're gonna show up here," I said, the words tasting like ash, probably with lawyers, and demand I sell everything to fix Julian's mess. Sophie was silent for a long moment, the only sound the chirping crickets. "Just be ready," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "They're coming soon." I glanced at her, a knot of dread in my stomach. Then she added, "I think we need to have a conversation before they get here." She started talking about Forge Tech Solutions, the patent portfolio, and how Julian's situation was far more complicated than I realized. She pulled out her phone, opened a file. "Julian's been running a hedge fund for the past 15 months. Did you know that?" I shook my head, dumbfounded. I thought he did development deals. "I've been helping Lucas track the industry, keeping tabs on who's moving in the coatings and materials space, who's making plays, who's betting against emerging technologies." She paused, her gaze unwavering. Julian has been shorting stocks, betting against businesses he believes will fail. She showed me a financial document on her phone. I looked at the screen, saw Julian's fund name, a list of holdings, and there, highlighted in red at the top, was the single largest bet he'd made. A massive short position against my company, Forge Tech Solutions. Julian had bet well over $900,000, including his client's money, that my company would fail. His entire position blew up when Forge Tech Solutions succeeded. Sophie finished, her voice a low hum. And he wrecked himself, betting against you? I processed this slowly, a cold understanding spreading through me. He was so sure that his brother-in-law, a plain metal fabricator, couldn't possibly have developed something substantial, that he put everything on my failure. Sophie merely smiled faintly. The universe is funny like that. The irony was a bitter pill. He who had spent years looking down on me had literally bet his future on my failure and lost. This is a classic example of narcissistic entitlement leading to a catastrophic blind spot. Julian's inflated self-worth and conviction that he was superior to Jack prevented him from even considering the possibility of Jack's success, leading him to make a reckless, self-destructive bet based on pure contempt rather than sound financial analysis. Does he know I own Forge Tech Solutions? I asked, a strange mix of disbelief and dark amusement bubbling up. I doubt it, Sophie replied. We registered the company under my maiden name as the primary contact for privacy. To him, it's just another overhyped materials tech startup run by people he's never heard of. He has no idea that his brother-in-law's failure destroyed him. We sat in silence, watching the last light disappear from the sky. 3 days later, a courier delivered a legal threat to our door. A fancy envelope, a law firm I'd never heard of. It stated that due to a family emergency and my moral duty, I had 1 week to assist in selling my property to improve Julian's financial circumstances, after which they would take all necessary legal action to compel a sale. Sophie was already on her phone. I'm calling our lawyer. We'd retained Mark, a sharp attorney specializing in business law and intellectual property, 6 months prior when Forge Tech started getting serious. They're threatening to sue you, she said, reading the document. To force you to sell your own home. Can they even do that? She asked, looking up at me. They're hoping you don't know they can't. The next morning, we met Mark at his office. We laid out everything, the threatening letter, the family history, and the kicker about Julian shorting my company. Mark laughed, a genuine, booming laugh, when we got to that part. Let me make sure I understand, he said, wiping a tear from his eye. They think you're a struggling fabricator who owns some family land. But in actuality, your brother-in-law bet against your $5 million coding technology business, and he lost everything when your business was successful. And now they want you to sell the land, which is actually a corporate asset, to help the man who tried to profit from your demise. Yep, I said, a dry smile on my face. Mark leaned back, shaking his head. This is amazing. It's like seeing someone punch themselves in the face and blame you for their broken nose. He clarified that their legal threats were baseless. The land had been moved into Forge Tech Solutions LLC's corporate structure 2 years prior for liability protection, meaning even if I wanted to, I couldn't sell it. What do we do? I asked. Nothing, he said, a glint in his eye. Let them decide what to do next. When that time comes, they won't file a lawsuit because any lawyer worth their license will tell them it's hopeless. They'll come in person, and I want to be there when they do. He chuckled again. Any judge would laugh their case out of court in about 25 seconds. The deadline came and went. Friday passed without a word. Saturday and Sunday were quiet, and I almost thought they had given up. But Monday morning proved me wrong. I was in the shop, setting up a program on my CNC mill, when I noticed 3 cars coming down the long driveway. Dad's Audi, Julian's less impressive BMW, and a third car I didn't recognize. I turned off the machine. The hum of the mill died, leaving an unnatural quiet. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I walked to the house where Sophie was already at the window, phone in hand. They're here, I said. I see them, she replied, hitting a button. Mark, it's a short pause. Perfect. See you soon. She hung up, looked at me. Our lawyer will be here in 20. Until then, we listen. Let them talk. The cars stopped. Doors opened. Dad got out first, looking 10 years older than I remembered. His shoulders slumped. Mom followed, her eyes red and swollen from crying the entire drive. Olivia, usually so meticulously put together, looked ruined, mascara streaked down her face. Julian, gaunt and pale, with dark circles under his eyes, looked like he hadn't slept in a month. From the third car emerged a man in a fancy suit, carrying a briefcase, their lawyer, no doubt. Jack? Dad's voice was strained, brittle. Need to talk. It seems like you drove a long way for a conversation we already had. I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the swirling emotions inside me. The situation is critical, he said, trying to sound authoritative, but it came out desperate, a raw plea. They didn't knock. Dad simply opened the shop door and walked in like he owned the place. Everyone followed, their eyes darting around, taking in the organized chaos of my workshop. I stood by my main workbench, Sophie by my side. Their lawyer pulled out a folder and dropped it onto my workbench with a definitive thud. Everything you need is here. Purchase agreement. We found a developer willing to buy the property, and the money goes straight into escrow to settle Julian's obligations. It's clean and it saves the family. Julian is facing multiple lawsuits, and criminal charges are being discussed. We need to take immediate action. Preserves the family. I repeated, my voice flat. You mean saves him? Jack, please? Olivia moved closer, her face contorted in a plea. For the first time in years, she wasn't acting superior. He's your brother-in-law. He's family. He made a mistake. But you can't let him go to prison. Please, I'm asking you as your sister. Their lawyer cleared his throat. Mr. Blake, you have a clear familial obligation here. The precedent for property transfers and family exigencies is well established. He didn't make a mistake. I corrected, my gaze fixed on Julian. He made a series of awful decisions. He's facing the consequences of his choices. This entire situation, their attempt to manipulate me into sacrificing my assets for Julian, is a classic case of emotional blackmail. They are leveraging familial ties and a distorted sense of obligation to coerce a specific outcome, disregarding my autonomy and the fundamental injustice of their demand. The lawyer scowled. The land is deeded to you through your grandmother's estate. The title is clear, he insisted. Fascinating. I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face. Because I was under the impression that you can't sell something you don't own. Dad's face flushed crimson. What are you talking about? Mom said, her voice heartbreakingly fragile. Stop playing games. We've already sold our house. It wasn't enough. This land is the only option after everything we've done for you. You owe us this after we reared you. I glanced at Sophie. She nodded slightly. It was time. Sophie stepped forward. Dad looked at her, perplexed. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding. She began, her voice cool and cutting, slicing through the tension like a razor. You've made several incorrect assumptions. You were mistaken about everything. You looked at us and saw precisely what you wanted to see. A basic fabricator and his wife. Poor, easy to push around. She placed her hand gently on the folder they'd brought, slowly pushing it aside on the workbench. And as a lawyer, I'm sure you understand property law. You can't sell what you don't own, Mrs. Blake. Their lawyer interjected. I don't think it's so. I kept my name, Sophie stated, staring him down. The lawyer argued that the deed was in my name. Sophie clarified, her voice unwavering. The land was officially transferred to Forge Tech Solutions LLC 2 years ago as a corporate asset. Since Jack is the company's creator and principal owner, it is in our name, and he is very definitely not selling. A dead quiet descended, thick and suffocating. Their lawyer's expression shifted from confident to visibly apprehensive. Mom looked utterly bewildered, and Dad's mouth hung open. But Julian, oh Julian. He had turned absolutely white, and I could see the wheels turning in his head as he stared at me, truly seeing me for the first time in years. Forge Tech Solutions, he murmured, the name a whisper on his lips, tinged with dawning horror. That's correct, I replied, my voice calm, almost conversational. Have you heard of it? No. You're a metal fabricator, he stammered, still grasping at his old narrative. I concur, I said, a small, cold smile on my face. Olivia was glancing between us, mascara streaked and confused. I am also the founder of a coding technology company that is currently valued at over $7.5 million. But you already knew that, didn't you, Julian? Dad looked at Julian, his voice tight with growing dread. What is he talking about, Julian? What's going on? I knew this moment would arrive. I walked to my workbench, unlocked a drawer, and took out a file. It contained financial records, patent applications, and one particularly intriguing quarterly report. I began working on a chemical coating procedure for metal around 5 years ago, I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the sudden silence of the shop. It took me 4 years to figure it out. While you all thought I was building garden gates, I filed patents, established a business, ran it covertly, and created something tangible. This, I said, holding up a single document, is a financial filing from your hedge fund. Public record. It shows all your major positions. Want to guess what your biggest bet was? He was unable to respond, his eyes wide and vacant. You shorted Forge Tech Solutions, investing well over $900,000 at your client's money because you were so sure it was a fabricated materials tech fraud that you wagered everything on it failing. I put the paper down. And when it succeeded instead of failing, your entire position collapsed. Dead stillness. You bet against me and lost everything? No, you couldn't have known it was his company, Olivia whispered, as if begging for a lifeline. Of course he didn't know, Sophie answered, her voice clear. We registered the company under my maiden name for his privacy. Olivia's legs gave out, and she fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. This isn't feasible. You're lying. Dad finally found his voice, a raw, wounded sound. Forge Tech was simply another startup to short. I finished, meeting his gaze. Because unlike you, I don't need to flaunt my accomplishments or a mansion to demonstrate my value. You don't have that type of money. You live in this modest rural home, he said, trying to reassert some semblance of control. Olivia was crying harder now, and Julian was trembling, a visible tremor shaking his whole body. I created a business that adds value rather than merely transferring money. You should have been the one in need of us. Therefore, this can't be happening. At that precise moment, another car pulled up outside. Our lawyer, Mark, walked in, his timing impeccable. He took a quick look at the scene, Olivia on the floor, Julian rigid with terror, my parents pale and shocked. And am I running late? He asked, a twinkle in his eye. Perfect timing, Sophie said. He placed his briefcase down and took out his own file. Just so you know, I'm Mark, and I work for Forge Tech Solutions and Jack Blake. He glanced at their attorney. You're Brian from Preston and Moore, right? I've read the materials your firm sent. Their lawyer gave a feeble nod, his confidence completely evaporated. All right, then I can tell you straight out that your demand letter has no legal value, Mark remarked nonchalantly. Any attempt to force a sale would be dismissed immediately, and given the circumstances, I'd probably file a harassment suit on top of it. He went on, taking out another document. Additionally, I've investigated Mr. Julian's financial status and found evidence of investor deception in addition to poor judgment in the short position on Forge Tech Solutions. Julian sounded like he'd been punched when he blurted out. The short was based on insider information. It was just a hunch. Securities fraud, Mark stated, his voice devoid of emotion. Their attorney was already packing his briefcase, his face a mask of defeat. Without saying another word, he made his way to the door. I haven't turned this over to the SEC yet, Mark added, his voice carrying clearly across the shop. I wanted to give you all a chance to walk away quietly first. How could you do this to us? Mom began to cry, her voice rising to a wail. Your family is us. Family doesn't make you feel unworthy for 25 years, I said, walking to the door, opening it wide. The cool autumn air rushed in, a welcome breath. Your family doesn't wager against your success and then demand that you ruin yourself to save them from their own foolishness. Get out of my shop. At first, none of them moved, frozen in their shame and disbelief. Get out of my life. Now, I urged, my voice firm, resonating with a lifetime of suppressed anger. Olivia was still on the floor, weeping. Julian had to physically pick her up. Dad made one final, desperate attempt. Son, you don't understand what you're doing. I guess they couldn't comprehend that I was serious. The result, I stood there, feeling something I hadn't felt in 25 years, freedom. The cars started, then they were gone. The consequences, all theirs to deal with. The following few weeks were silent. No irate phone calls, no frantic texts. Mark kept me informed Julian was buried in lawsuits, 3 of his biggest investors having launched civil claims. His marriage to Olivia was in ruins. They had moved into a small apartment on the shady side of town. Olivia had deleted all her social media accounts, her performative life shattered. Dad and Mom had sold their house at a loss and were renting a small condo somewhere. The SEC had opened an investigation into Julian's trading practices after those lawsuits caught their attention. Dad had returned to his former firm in a consulting role, basically a pity job from his ex-partners, a bitter pill to swallow. Most days, Rachel told me Mom spent crying, asking why I was doing this to them. In their minds, I was the bad guy, the ungrateful son who had deserted his family when they needed him most. But their narratives no longer held power over me. Forge Tech Solutions was taking off. We signed another licensing deal. I built a proper office space in the barn, hired 2 full-time employees to manage things, and started holding business meetings with people who actually took me seriously. The custom fabrication work slowed down. I kept a few regular clients, working on projects that truly interested me, but mostly I was focused on the future of Forge Tech. Another company was using our process for automotive parts, and a regional aerospace manufacturer wanted to test it for their components. We were creating new applications, filing more patents, building something that could outlast both of us. We were happy, And the absence of my family's constant criticism made it even better. Sophie was thriving. She was running R&D full time, her brilliant mind unlocking new possibilities. About 5 weeks after the altercation, on a Saturday afternoon, I noticed Rachel's sedan pull into the driveway. I went outside to greet her. She stepped out, a casserole dish in her hand and an anxious expression on her face. "Bro lasagna?" she said, trying for a smile. "We eat pretty well," I remarked, grinning. "Come on in." We sat on the porch, talking for a while, before she revealed the true reason for her visit. "I heard your parents are barely holding it together. Dad works all the time, and Mom just sits at home. They don't talk about you, but I know they think about you all the time. Olivia and Julian's marriage is essentially over. She said they're staying together for the time being because they can't afford lawyers. But she resents him completely and blames him for everything. And Julian?" Rachel remained silent for a while. "Jack, he's broken. Really broken. I mean, he's aware that he wrecked himself because he was too conceited to appreciate what you had created." "Good," I said, and I really did mean it. A cold, hard satisfaction settled in my chest. "They want to apologize," Rachel gently replied. "Eventually, when enough time has passed. They think maybe if they give you space, you'll come around." "I won't." I said the words firm. "I know they don't believe me." Rachel got up. "I'm not pleading with you to pardon them. I'm not even requesting that you speak with them. I simply wanted you to be aware of their misery. It doesn't matter if you care about that or not." "Sincerely," I continued. "I was treated as though I wasn't worthy of their time for 25 years. Sophie was made to feel inadequate for 5 years by them. They arrived with the intention of stealing everything I had created. Their implications won't keep me up at night. I'm proud of you, for what it's worth," Rachel said, nodding, already making her way to her car. She paused, turning back. "They were challenged by what you created with Forge Tech Solutions. It required courage. Thanks, Rachel," I said. "And if it's all right with you, I'd like to continue seeing you. You're welcome here anytime." She smiled in relief before driving away. "I know I'm part of the family that screwed you over, but you're the only one who didn't," I called after her. "Rachel stopped by," I said as Sophie and I sat on the porch swing that evening. I observed. Sophie replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "How is the family catastrophe progressing?" "As you might anticipate, Julian is ruined. Olivia is a complete mess. Parents are hardly working. They all think I'm going to forgive them eventually." "Are you?" she asked, leaning her head on my shoulder. "No," I said after giving it some thought. "I'm not angry anymore. I'm just finished." My phone buzzed, alerting me to an email. I looked at it and was astounded. "What?" Sophie inquired, sensing the shift in my demeanor. "Forge Tech Solutions just got an acquisition offer." "Who is it from?" she asked, sitting upright. "Major Industrial Coatings. Their intention is to buy us out." I read the amount twice, just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. 20 million. Sophie remained still, her eyes wide. 20 million. "Are you serious?" she breathed. "That is crazy. What are you interested in doing?" "I want to think about it," I said, surveying the property, the house where we had built our lives, the shop where I had welded my first project, the acreage my grandmother had trusted me with. However, I'm not basing any decisions on their opinions. Their viewpoint is no longer relevant. We sat there for a while in the quiet twilight. Somewhere, they were undoubtedly assuring each other that I would change my mind, that blood was blood, and that family was family. But they were mistaken. 3 months later, I was in a city conference room, surrounded by attorneys and business people, signing the last documents. We agreed to accept the 20 million acquisition, provided that I remained for 3 years as head of R&D to continue creating new applications. The following day, the money arrived in my account. I spent a good 5 minutes staring at the figure on my phone, a number that would change everything. The first thing I did was pay off the property entirely, free and clear, no mortgages, no liens, no anything else attached. The land my grandmother left me was mine, forever. I had made more money than my father had in his entire career, working in a metal shop he had referred to as a hobby. After that, I established a trust to keep it safe, so that no one could touch it, not even Sophie's relatives or creditors. And the second was a significant donation to the conservation center where Sophie used to work, a place where they were actually doing something to assist the environment, rather than just talking about it. I kept the shop, continued to take on projects I wanted to undertake, and continued to live the same life, but without the strain, investing the majority of it in things that would bring in money without requiring me to think about it. I disregarded most of the messages that came from distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years, and old high school acquaintances who all wanted to get back in touch. because they had always believed in me and were so proud. My parents didn't get in touch with me, at least not directly, but Rachel informed me that they had heard the news. Mom had been crying for hours. Olivia had spent the entire afternoon locked in the bathroom. One afternoon, I was working on a custom staircase railing in the shop when I heard a car pull up outside, the expensive rumble of a powerful engine. I looked up and saw my father's Audi. He had come by himself. I thought about not responding, about letting him sit there, but I stepped outside. Dad was standing by his car, looking utterly wrecked. The last few months had aged him beyond his years. "Jack," he said, and silence fell between us as he surveyed the property, the shop, everything he had spent years ignoring. "I made a mistake," he finally said, his voice raspy. "Just one of many?" I didn't answer. He went on, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I believed I was guiding you towards something greater, because I believed I understood what success looked like." He laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "I thought Julian had it figured out, that Olivia married the right kind of man. I was wrong about everything. You were really." He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, raw and vulnerable. "I'm not pleading for your pardon. I'm not worthy of it. I wanted to let you know that I can now see it. I'm sorry I didn't notice it sooner, but I can see what you've always been creating. I appreciate you saying that." I told him, my voice devoid of emotion. "But it doesn't change anything. Dad, you weren't only a mistake maker. You have made me feel unworthy all my life. Each and every time you picked Olivia and Julian over me. At our wedding, you allowed people to make fun of my wife. You came here with the intention of stealing everything I had created to protect him from his own foolishness. I understand. Now that I was successful, you are not entitled to an apology. Now that there's money involved, you can't be proud of me. It doesn't work that way." His face fell apart. "How can I help?" he whispered, desperate. "Nothing," I said, my voice firm. "Please don't disturb me ever again." "Jack, you need to leave?" He stood there for a bit longer, perhaps wanting to say something more. But what was there to say? He got back in his Audi and drove off, and I felt nothing as I watched him go. I had spent 25 years trying to win their favor. I had made something that would outlast all of us, and I had proven everything I needed to prove, not to them, but to myself. My grandmother had left me this land, believing that I would use it for something worthwhile, and she had been right to believe in me. I had chosen my own route, created my own life, played my own game by my own rules, and I had won. I had taken her gift and transformed it into something that no one had anticipated, something genuine. What do you believe truly defines success, and how much influence should family expectations have on the path you choose to forge for yourself? If this story resonated with you, you might be familiar with the hidden dynamics of family relationships. We explored themes like familial invalidation, where consistent dismissal of one's efforts can profoundly impact self-worth, leading to individuals either retreating into themselves or, like Jack, quietly building their own success outside the family gaze. We also saw the destructive power of narcissistic entitlement in Julian, whose inflated ego and contempt for others blinded him to reality and ultimately led to his downfall. Finally, the family's desperate attempt to coerce Jack through guilt and obligation highlights the insidious nature of emotional blackmail, a manipulative tactic often disguised as concern or love. Understanding these psychological principles can help you identify unhealthy patterns in your own life and empower you to set boundaries, cultivate genuine self-worth, and pursue your passions on your own terms. For more insights into navigating complex family dynamics and building resilience, consider subscribing to our channel and checking out resources on boundary setting and emotional intelligence.